There are movies that are good. There are movies that are great. And then there are movies that somehow burrow into the cultural brain and never leave, films that people are still quoting, still debating, and still laughing at decades after they first hit theaters. Blazing Saddles is one of those movies. Released in 1974, this wild, loud, chaotic Western comedy from director Mel Brooks has earned a permanent place in film history. It broke rules that most filmmakers didn't even realize existed. It made audiences uncomfortable in ways that made them laugh harder. It poked fun at racism, Hollywood conventions, Western movie cliches, and the entire idea of what a proper film was supposed to look like. And it did all of this with such infectious energy that people couldn't help but love it. But here's the thing, and this is what we're going to dig into today. Some of the moments that made this film truly unforgettable weren't born from genius-level planning or carefully rehearsed choreography. Some of them happened by accident. Pure, unscripted, no-one-saw-it-coming accident. Specifically, there is one scene in Blazing Saddles, one of the most beloved, most talked about, most warmly remembered scenes in the entire film, that came to life not because of a clever script or a director's master vision, but because something unexpected happened on set, the cameras kept rolling, and the actors responded in the most human way possible. And the result? Magic. Today, we're going to look at how that happened. We're going to explore the film itself, the characters that carried it, the creative environment that made it possible, and the fascinating truth about how accidents can sometimes create the greatest moments in cinema history. Let's get into it. To really understand what made Blazing Saddles so remarkable, you have to understand the landscape it was born into. The Western genre, by the early 1970s, had been a cornerstone of American cinema for decades. Think about the image: a lone cowboy riding into a dusty town, a showdown at high noon, a villain dressed in black, a sheriff upholding justice with a steely jaw and very few words. These were the templates. These were the rules. And for years, they worked. Audiences lined up reliably for these kinds of stories, and Hollywood was more than happy to keep producing them. But by the early 70s, something was shifting. American audiences were becoming more self-aware, more cynical, and more interested in stories that challenged the comfortable myths that Hollywood had been selling them. The clean, heroic version of the Wild West was starting to feel a little hollow. People were beginning to ask the questions that the genre had been quietly dodging for years, like the fact that the heroic conquest of the West had come at enormous human cost, or that the noble lawman figure in these films rarely resembled the complicated reality of frontier justice. Into this moment stepped Mel Brooks, a filmmaker with a gift for comedy that was sharp enough to draw blood. Brooks had already proven himself capable of dissecting a genre with a scalpel wrapped in a rubber chicken. His earlier film The Producers had done something similar for Broadway showbiz culture. But Blazing Saddles was different. It was louder, angrier, more chaotic, and more willing to go places that polite cinema simply did not go. The premise was deceptively simple. A black sheriff is appointed to a small, deeply racist frontier town in what appears to be a corrupt political scheme to drive the townspeople away. The people in charge assume that the sheriff will be so unwelcome, so despised, and so undermined by the community that he'll fail, and the town will fall into the hands of the crooked state attorney general who wants the land for a railroad. What they didn't count on was Sheriff Bart being smarter than everyone around him. But before we get to the magic moment, the accident that became a legend, we need to talk about the people who made it happen. Cleavon Little was not a household name when he was cast as Sheriff Bart. He was a talented stage actor who had won a Tony Award on Broadway, but film stardom had not yet found him. When he stepped into this role, he brought something with him that you genuinely cannot teach or manufacture, an effortless, natural charm that made every single scene he appeared in feel like it was being lit from the inside. What made Sheriff Bart such a groundbreaking character wasn't just the writing, it was the way Little inhabited him. He played Bart not as a symbol or a statement, but as a real, witty, quick-thinking human being who just happened to be navigating an environment built to reject him. There was no martyrdom in the performance, no heavy-handed drama. Instead, there was intelligence, humor, and a kind of fluid confidence that made Bart the most competent person in any room he walked into, even when the room was actively hostile. This was radical for 1974. Western heroes in mainstream Hollywood cinema looked a very specific way, and Cleavon Little did not fit that mold, which was, of course, entirely the point. By casting him and writing Bart as the smartest, coolest, most capable figure in the story, Brooks was making a pointed comment about the absurdity of the racism the film was satirizing. The joke was always on the bigots. Bart wasn't the butt of the humor, the idiots who couldn't see his worth were. But what makes Little's performance special isn't just the political statement underneath it. It's the lightness. The ease. The way he could deliver a line and have it land like a perfectly thrown dart, fast, precise, and almost casual. He never seemed to be working hard, which is one of the surest signs that someone is working very hard indeed. He was also, it turns out, exactly the kind of performer who could turn an unexpected moment into something extraordinary. Which brings us to his co-star. If Sheriff Bart was the engine of Blazing Saddles, then the Waco Kid, played by Gene Wilder, was the steering wheel. There's a fascinating backstory to Wilder's casting in this role. The part was originally written with another actor in mind, but scheduling conflicts changed the plan, and Gene Wilder stepped in. As history has proven many times over, the best accidents are sometimes the ones that happen before the cameras even start rolling. Wilder was, in many ways, perfect for this role in a way that would have been hard to predict on paper. His version of the Waco Kid is a man who has given up. He's a legendary gunslinger who has lost his nerve, his ambition, and his interest in the world. When we first meet him, he's a crumpled figure in a jail cell, looking at the ceiling with the resigned expression of someone who has seen everything and decided that most of it wasn't worth the trouble. He is, at first glance, completely finished. And yet, Gene Wilder plays him with this incredibly subtle undercurrent of dry, understated humor that makes every scene he's in quietly hilarious. He doesn't shout. He doesn't perform broadly. He simply says things in a completely flat, matter-of-fact way, with perfect timing, and the laugh sneaks up on you a half-second after the words have landed. It's a particular skill, and Wilder had it in abundance. What made the Waco Kid and Sheriff Bart such an unforgettable pair was the contrast between them. Bart is alive with energy, constantly reacting, constantly moving forward. The Waco Kid is still and watchful, a man of few words who makes each one count. Together, they created a rhythm that felt less like scripted dialogue and more like two people genuinely figuring each other out in real time. Their scenes had warmth that went beyond the jokes. You actually believed in their friendship. And it was in one of these scenes, a quiet, intimate exchange between the two of them, that the magic accident occurred. Here's what makes this particular story so interesting. The scene that everyone remembers, the one with that moment of pure spontaneous chemistry, didn't become iconic because of what was written. It became iconic because of what wasn't written. During filming, something unexpected happened. In the middle of a scene between Sheriff Bart and the Waco Kid, Gene Wilder did something that wasn't in the script. It was a small thing, not a massive, scene-stopping gesture, but a tiny, instinctive human reaction to a moment that caught him off guard. A flicker of genuine amusement that broke through the performance just long enough to be real. Cleavon Little saw it happen. And instead of breaking character or stopping the scene, he responded to it. Naturally. Honestly. The way one person responds when something actually strikes them as funny, not the way an actor responds when they've been told to look amused. The cameras kept rolling. And what ended up in the finished film is not two actors executing a scene. It's two human beings genuinely delighting in each other's company, with all the small, unguarded, slightly imperfect honesty that real delight carries with it. You can see it in their faces. You can feel it in the timing, which is slightly looser than it would be in a tightly controlled performance, with the kind of natural give and take that emerges when people stop concentrating quite so hard on being perfect. Mel Brooks saw the footage in editing and made the call to keep it exactly as it was. And that decision is part of what separates truly great filmmakers from merely competent ones. A less confident director might have pulled the scene, worried that the slight roughness would undermine the professionalism of the production. Brooks understood that the roughness was the point. It was the soul of the moment. The audience didn't need to be told any of this, of course. They just felt it. Something about that scene hits differently from the more carefully controlled moments in the film. It has a warmth and an immediacy that you can't manufacture, because the warmth and immediacy were real. This raises a genuinely fascinating question about how comedy functions, and why unplanned moments so often land harder than scripted ones. Think about the last time something made you really laugh, not a polite, appreciative chuckle, but a genuine, involuntary, slightly embarrassing laugh that you didn't see coming. Chances are, it was something unexpected. A piece of timing that was slightly off in a way that made it perfect. A reaction from someone that revealed a flash of genuine feeling. Something real breaking through the surface of a planned situation. Comedy, at its deepest level, is about surprise. The brain finds something funny in large part because it predicted one thing and got another. When that gap between expectation and reality is just the right size, not so large that it's confusing, not so small that it's predictable, the result is laughter. What happens with genuine, unscripted moments is that the gap between expectation and reality operates on two levels simultaneously. There's the joke itself, which is written and therefore predictable in the way any crafted comedy is. And then there's the layer underneath it, the genuine human reaction that wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, and wasn't supposed to be there, which creates a second, unexpected gap that the audience feels even if they can't identify it. This is why audiences often describe certain performances as real without being able to explain exactly what they mean. What they're responding to is that second layer, the one that emerges from genuine experience rather than careful construction. Gene Wilder understood this instinctively. Across his career, some of his most memorable moments were built on this principle, the willingness to let something real slip through, to be genuinely in the moment rather than simply performing the idea of being in the moment. It's a subtle but profound distinction. Cleavon Little had the same quality. Together, they created something in that scene that neither of them could have created alone or on purpose. Of course, the discussion of great performances in Blazing Saddles cannot go anywhere without spending serious time on Madeline Kahn and her portrayal of Lili Von Shtupp. If Sheriff Bart and the Waco Kid were the heart of the film, Kahn was the electric charge that jolted the whole thing to life whenever she appeared. Her performance as the world-weary, theatrical, magnificently exaggerated German saloon singer is one of the great comedic turns in American film history, and it almost defies description, because what made it brilliant operated on so many levels at once. On the surface, it's a parody. Lili Von Shtupp is a loving, slightly savage send-up of a particular type of glamorous femme fatale figure that appeared endlessly in Hollywood films, specifically channeling the energy and persona of Marlene Dietrich and similar icons of smoky, European sensuality. The accent, the posture, the slow drawl, the theatrical exhaustion with men and their admiration, it's all sending up a very specific cinematic archetype. But what makes Kahn's performance more than just a parody is the genuine comedic intelligence she brings to every moment. She doesn't just imitate the archetype, she inhabits it so completely and then subverts it so perfectly that the result is something entirely her own. There's a scene where she performs on stage for the besotted townspeople of Rock Ridge, and the way she moves between grand theatrical poses and completely flat, deadpan humor is simply extraordinary. The audience is laughing at Lili, but they're also laughing with her, and that's a razor-thin line that only the best comedic performers can walk. Kahn received an Academy Award nomination for this role, which says something significant about the critical establishment's recognition of what she was doing, even in the context of a broad comedy that many in Hollywood were inclined to dismiss. Her scenes had a quality similar to the accidental magic we've already discussed. They felt alive and slightly unpredictable. Even when every word was scripted and every move was planned, Kahn brought something in her delivery that made it feel spontaneous. She was the kind of performer who made you feel like you were watching something unfold rather than something being performed. Here's a detail that surprises a lot of people when they learn it. a film as wild and rule-breaking as Blazing Saddles actually had material that Mel Brooks himself decided was too far. Given the movie's reputation, the campfire scene, the outrageous racial humor, the climax that literally breaks the fourth wall and spills out of the Western narrative into the rest of Hollywood, it might seem impossible that there was a line Brooks looked at and said, "No, not that one." But there was. During the filming of a scene involving Sheriff Bart and Lili Von Shtupp, a particular punchline had been written that was meant to follow a specific comedic setup. It was a joke rooted in racial stereotype, a punchline that took the scene in a direction that, on reflection, Brooks concluded undermined the film's larger purpose rather than serving it. The distinction matters. Blazing Saddles is absolutely full of racial humor. It uses racist language and racist attitudes openly, but always, in service of exposing those things as the absurdities they are. The targets of the film's sharpest comedy are never the people being discriminated against. The targets are the bigots, the systems, the comfortable myths. That consistency of direction is a large part of why the film's approach to its subject matter holds up as satire rather than collapsing into the thing it's supposed to be mocking. The joke that Brooks cut would have disrupted that consistency. It would have pointed the humor in the wrong direction, even briefly. And so he made the call to remove it. This is, in its own way, as instructive as the story of the happy accident. Great creative work isn't just about what you put in, it's about what you're willing to leave out. The willingness to kill your darlings, as the writing advice goes. To recognize that a joke might be clever in isolation but wrong in context, and to have the discipline to let it go. Brooks was someone who understood comedy deeply enough to know when he was pushing in a direction that served the film and when he was pushing just for the sake of pushing. That self-awareness, that editorial instinct, is part of what gave Blazing Saddles its durability. It's funny in the way that only smart things are funny, with a clear sense of what it's doing and why. The cut also demonstrates something important: even the most freewheeling creative processes have internal logic. Blazing Saddles looks like chaos. In many ways, it is chaos. But it's chaos with a compass. Let's talk about the ending of Blazing Saddles, because it deserves its own conversation and because it connects directly to everything we've been discussing about accidents, instincts, and the courage to break the rules. In the final act of the film, the story does something that was genuinely radical for mainstream American cinema at the time. It abandons all pretense of being a Western. The characters literally punch through the set wall and spill out of their narrative into the rest of the film studio. They crash a musical being filmed on an adjacent soundstage. They spill out onto the streets of Hollywood. Sheriff Bart ends up at a movie theater, watching himself in Blazing Saddles. It sounds insane. And it is, absolutely, insane. But it works, and it works for the same reason that the accidental scene works, because it feels honest. The movie has been quietly winking at the audience for its entire runtime, pointing out the conventions of the Western genre, nudging the viewer to notice the gap between the myth and the reality. By the end, dropping the pretense completely and literally showing the audience that they're watching a construction, a set, a performance, a story, is the only logically consistent conclusion. It's the joke that the whole film has been building toward. And here's what's interesting: this kind of ending could have felt like a gimmick. In lesser hands, breaking the fourth wall this explicitly often does feel like a gimmick, a clever trick that doesn't earn the emotional weight it's trying to carry. But in Blazing Saddles, it lands because the film has been so consistently honest throughout. It's never pretended to be something it wasn't. The accident that became the beloved scene, the chemistry between the leads that didn't come from a script, the jokes that were cut because they pointed the wrong way, all of these things were part of a filmmaking process built on genuine instinct and genuine honesty. When that honesty reaches its logical extreme in the finale, it doesn't feel like a trick. It feels like a promise being kept. Step back from the specifics of this film for a moment and look at the broader principle it illustrates, because it's one of the most genuinely useful things you can learn about creative work of any kind. We tend to romanticize the idea of perfect execution. We imagine the great works of art, film, music, and literature emerging from some perfect union of vision and craft, a creator who knew exactly what they wanted, planned every detail, and executed flawlessly. And sometimes that is how great work happens. But more often than the mythology suggests, great work happens because someone was paying close enough attention to recognize something valuable when it arrived unexpectedly, and was flexible enough to let go of the plan in favor of the better thing that had just shown up. Mel Brooks didn't sit in an editing room looking at Gene Wilder's unscripted flicker of genuine amusement and say, "That's not what we planned, cut it." He looked at it and recognized it for what it was, something real. Something that could not have been manufactured. Something that, precisely because it was not planned, carried a weight and a warmth that the most carefully crafted version of the scene could not have matched. That recognition, the ability to see the value in the unexpected, is arguably as important as any other creative skill. You can learn to write. You can learn to frame a shot. You can learn rhythm and pacing and structure. But learning to remain genuinely open while you're working, to notice when something better than your plan has arrived and welcome it rather than defending the plan, that's harder. It requires a kind of creative confidence that is actually built on security rather than rigidity. The security to know that if you let go of the thing you planned, you're not lost. You're following something real. Cleavon Little had that. Gene Wilder had it. Madeline Kahn had it. And Mel Brooks, sitting in that editing room making the call to keep the scene exactly as it was, had it in spades. This is why Blazing Saddles doesn't feel like other movies. It doesn't feel like it was controlled into existence. It feels like it was discovered. Blazing Saddles is over 50 years old. It was made in a very specific cultural moment, addressing very specific social dynamics of its time. And yet people are still watching it, still laughing at it, still arguing about it, still writing about it. Why? Part of it is the humor, obviously. The jokes are funny. The performances are excellent. The satire is sharp. These things don't expire the way some kinds of comedy do. But a larger part of it, I'd argue, is the honesty. This is a film that was genuinely, recklessly honest in a way that most mainstream American films, then and now, are not. It was honest about the absurdity of racism. It was honest about the conventions of Hollywood storytelling. It was honest about the gap between the myths a culture tells itself and the reality those myths are built to obscure. And it was honest in the smaller, more personal sense we've been discussing today, the willingness to let real human moments breathe on screen instead of covering them with polish. That honesty is rare. And rare things have staying power. The accidental scene is a perfect microcosm of this. Nobody planned for Gene Wilder to react the way he did. Nobody planned for Cleavon Little to respond the way he did. Nobody planned for the cameras to catch it or for the editor to keep it. But all of those things happened, and the result is something that has outlasted most of the carefully constructed, perfectly planned Hollywood moments from the same era. There's a lesson in that. Not just for filmmakers, but for anyone who creates anything. Sometimes the best thing you can make is the thing you didn't plan to make. Sometimes the most powerful moment in your work is the one where you stopped performing it and started living it. Blazing Saddles knew that. Or rather, the people who made it, trusted the moment, trusted each other, and trusted that the audience would feel the difference between something manufactured and something real. They were right. So that's the story. A film that broke every rule in the book turned out to have its greatest moment come from an accident. An unscripted reaction, a natural response, a decision to keep rolling and see what happened. It's one of my favorite things about cinema, this idea that after all the planning and the writing and the rehearsing and the lighting and the costume design and everything else that goes into making a movie, sometimes the thing people remember most is the moment when all of that structure quietly stepped aside and let something human happen. Blazing Saddles is full of those moments. They're why it's been beloved for 50 years and will probably be beloved for 50 more. If you've never seen the film, I genuinely encourage you to go watch it. It is genuinely unlike anything else. And if you have seen it, maybe it's worth a rewatch with fresh eyes, now that you know the story behind the moment that nobody planned. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Have you seen Blazing Saddles? What's your favorite scene? And do you think some of the best moments in film history came from accidents? I'd really love to hear from you on that. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than most people realize. And subscribe if you want more deep dives into the stories behind the films that shaped cinema. Take care of yourselves. And I'll see you in the next one.